Right. Okay. Welcome, everyone, here in the room, and those out in the ether whenever you pick this up. This is my 11th, my penultimate show for the PBH Free Fringe 2023. Woo! Getting almost close to the end. Last show tomorrow. Yay. So, this is a bit exciting in some way. I'm going to mix up the playlist. My running order, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I'm not a theory trained person, you know. I make this up as I go along. But I'm also trying my new radio mic because the other one got broken while at the Fringe last week. Well, in fact, it actually never did work at the start with, but by the by, let's just get on with the show, shall we? Toby was nervous. He's always nervous on first dates. And this one was a bit of a blind date, to be honest. It was the result of talking to a mate who recommended a new dating website that was worth a try. And, you know, he trusted his mate. They'd known each other for what felt like centuries. So, you know, an old friend. So he decided, well, they both decided to actually meet at his favourite restaurant. The food's good, does perfectly raw steak, how he likes it, nice and rare. So he felt safe here. And in the pouring rain, he waited for his date. Her name was Elizabeth, or Beth, as she preferred to be called. Well, he sat playing with the breadsticks, just waiting and waiting. The door opens. He looks up, and there she is. Gorgeous. The waiter escorts her to the table. She takes off her very wet coat and sits down. Blonde, blue-eyed, immaculate makeup, considering, you know, it's chucking it out down there, outside. Nice red dress, very, very classy, and a little bit of a neck scarf, which really sort of gives a bit of a retro feel. He quite likes that. Well, the food is good, obviously, because it's his favourite place. And they talk all night. Eat, drink, talk. Eat, drink, talk. Till they're the last ones in the restaurant. Well, it goes so well. They agree, why not do some more? With a date each night for the rest of the week. They're in different places. Cinema, which was a bit on the back row, as you do. Again, beautifully dressed every time they meet. Now, as the days go by, things get a little bit more serious. Toby thinks this could be the one. However, you know, while she is absolutely perfect, there is just one slight niggle he has. It's minor. It is absolutely minor, considering how wonderful the thing is. She is always immaculate dressed. Not a problem with that. Great. But it's these fixations she has with scarves. Now, normally it wouldn't bother him, but, you know, when they're having a bit of a snog, say, like in the cinema at the back row, does get in the way somewhat. And every time he goes to touch it, she freezes and sits back. Kills the mood. Not sure what's up there. Towards the end of the week, with things going so well, Beth suggests she cook at her flat. Now, Toby is excited and nervous. Cooking at her flat, a meal at her flat, that's code, isn't it? Something is going to happen. Well, luckily, by the end of the week, the rain has stopped and Toby is stood on her doorstep, looking straight at the door. The moon is bright. He hovers, paused. Is he reading this correctly? Is this gonna be special? He doesn't want to blow it. He knocks. And on opening the door, Beth, again, is immaculately dressed. Now, he was certain they were going to be staying in. So why is she just dressed as if she's going out? Let's just roll with it. His mouth is agape. She waves, nudges him. Gonna come in? Toby shakes his out of his surprise and shock and goes in. Now, Beth's flat, like her clothing, is immaculate. Minimalist, that's okay. He's okay with that. And likewise, the food is light. Now, at first he was a little concerned, but then he worked it out. Good thinking, Beth. Not a full stomach. That's definitely a sign of things to come. After dinner, Beth surprises him again. Why don't they watch a film? A horror film. Toby's a bit surprised about that because, well, it's not the kind of thing they've watched together before. And then he twigged. Yes, horror film, but the scary bits, they can cuddle up for those. Good way of getting to know one another. Good thinking, Beth. So they sit down, watch the film. But things start to get a bit heavy. And fingers, hands, and lips begin to find their way. He follows along, kissing along her arm, along her collar, to her neck. That dreaded scarf again. This time, he's going to do something about it. He tugs. But instead of finding skin, he encounters empty space. He opens his eyes. He's not quite expecting the kind of shock he encounters, but her head is not there. Then he hears a little voice, Beth's voice, from down, and looking down into her lap. Her head is looking back up at him. She smiles. Would you kindly lift my head back up and place it on my shoulders, please? That scarf was the only thing holding my head on until some new bolts arrive. Toby obliges as if this is completely normal. That sudden shock, he's not feeling too good. And he sits back on the sofa as Beth quickly adjusts the scarf to fit. She looks concerned at him. Was that a bit of a shock for you? She says. I was going to tell you. I was. Toby is sweating profusely now. He is not feeling very good. He gasps. Well, perhaps if I found out your secret, perhaps I should tell you mine? Beth cocks her eyebrow and watches, expecting. Toby's body begins to shake. Hair begins to sprout over his body. His fingers elongate. His face elongates and large fangs begin to form. Amazing, claps Beth. Wow, a werewolf. The Monta dating website was fantastic matching us together. She grabs Toby's now paw. Come with me. Let's go to the bedroom. I like a man who's wild. And that's that one. that one went off a little bit there. Oh, end of run. Right. And we've lost someone. Okay, never mind. Let's think, what was I going to do next? I was going to do Mary Shelley again. I like the Mary Shelley story. So, I'm currently residing here in Dover. Up there, which you can't see, mainly because it's dark and the curtains are drawn, is Dover Castle. And then over that side, we got a Napoleonic fort. Now, Dover's seen a lot of things in its history. And one that really fits such a kind of story environment is an episode that occurred in 1814. Of all the illustrious people to pass through Dover, a crucial and one occurred. It was July, I think, did I write the date down? I don't think so, but I think it was something like 9th of July, 1814, something along those lines. A young 16-year-old Mary was eloping with, I think, around a 20-odd-year-old Percy Shelley. He had whisked her away from her parents in London, and they were hurtling by carriage to Dover to catch one of the clippers, or one of the ships, whatever they were, that crossed the Channel to France. Normally, around that time, and it hasn't really changed much since, to be honest, the crossing across for the Channel to Calais was about 3 hours. They were hoping to get to Paris and be safe away from her parents, who weren't quite that keen on Percy. Well, things turned quite bad on that crossing, and I have a page that has been found, torn from her diary, detailing the crossing, which sheds light on some of her future work and one of the most famous of all her works, Frankenstein. I will tell you what was on this page. We set sail from Dover. It was late. The ship set out. All was well until we were about halfway across the channel, and a storm whipped up. A storm no one was expecting. It rocked the ship so violently we feared for our lives. We were clearly being blown off course, and all able-bodied men were summoned on deck, including passengers, including my dear Percy. I was left below decks with the other women folk, and there was only one other woman passenger on board. She wasn't very talkative, but as our plight increased and the chances of possible, well, dare I say, shipwreck, death, sinking in this howling gale as the men fought to keep the ship on line to Calais, she began to talk. Her name was Margaret, actually a local from Dover, the port we left, and she too was heading to France to create a new life. She was travelling with a cousin chaperone. They too were going to Paris like us. So I inquired, as is polite, about her life. It was not what I expected. Margaret lived in one of the townhouses at the bottom of the castle for Dover. Her husband, Charles, a noted surgeon, he'd served with the military garrisoned at the castle and up at the other forts. He served as their surgeon, and he also practiced his general practice, his medical work, amongst the more wealthy around the town and surrounding areas. They had a good life, a nice house, comfortable. That was until some events occurred that threw Margaret's life into complete turmoil. It started one night when there was a knock on the front door. It was late. She didn't get to the door in time. Charles was already there, which was unusual. And he motioned her away, obviously a call he was expecting. She didn't see the visitor. Charles ushered him straight into his study and shut the door. Unusual for a late call that late. And uncharacteristically, I did listen, just curious. I couldn't make out the voice. Sounded familiar, but the door muffled so much. There was arguing, which was concerning and not something I would have expected for a medical house call. It went on for some time. I grew weary and headed to bed. Now, normally for breakfast, we meet before Charles goes out on calls for the day. He didn't join me for breakfast that morning. I hadn't even seen him by lunchtime. Perhaps this late call took him away. Maybe a serious problem. But by evening time, I was beginning to be concerned. It's unusual for him to be away for so long. So I sat and waited. He did not return, and I went to bed. Again, following breakfast, still no sign of Charles. I was deeply concerned. I sent one of the servants' maids off to the local justice of the peace, just to ask had he been seen? The justice obviously knows everybody. He does work up at the fort and at the castle, so he is certainly suitable to keep an ear to the ground. Nope, no sign of Charles. I expressed my concern when the justice of the peace came. He suggested a number of options. Now, there is one place I haven't looked, to be honest. It's the lab. It's in the basement. From time to time, Charles would ask me to assist him in the lab. And with chemicals and lifting and holding things. I hadn't considered that. I was pretty certain he wasn't even in the house. So I tried the door. It was locked. Now, the justice suggested perhaps he's had an accident down there. It was a reasonable conclusion. And he asked me to step back while he tried and shoulder the door open. It takes a few goes, and shortly he's broken the door and ventures in. He urges me to stay just in case there is something. Just for my own safety, of course. If there is a chemical spill, it would be detrimental to my health. Well, the justice, Julian, was gone for a while. I was a little concerned. And then he returned, his face white. He begs me to retire to the study. I fear the worst. Perhaps Charles has had an accident. But Julian sends off message to the barracks and summons a number of men to help with moving something he has found in the basement. There's a lot of coming and going. The men's faces look grim, and they do carry stretchers and so on. This is all unusual. I have to stop Julian and ask him what is going on. Is Charles down there? He bids me to be seated and tells me quite plainly, Charles is not down there, but something else is. Something they weren't expecting. A variety of cadavers in various states of dissection. He'd also recognised one of the cadavers as being a convict because of the tattoos that had been present on the arm. The other arm of this convict was missing. And of the various body parts, they were incomplete bodies. This was quite clearly possibly grave robbing going on, and obviously a serious offence. Julian suggested, at my sudden shock at this revelation, that I accompany him back to his house and stay with him and his wife, just to recuperate and to be free of this very morbid discovery. A couple of days staying there, I begin to consider perhaps this isn't just for my delicate constitution, but perhaps I'm also a suspect in this. Well, a search is sent out for Charles. It's a very serious issue. No sign of him. He has not been seen for days. And I am deeply concerned. I do not mention this man that came the night he disappeared. just in case it incriminates my husband. Then I get to hear of some interesting and quite honestly disturbing things. A murder has took place in the Pier District down on the docks. It's a squalid place, tight, horrible, messy, rancid buildings all among the warehouses. A sailor and a woman selling matchsticks have been murdered, beaten to death. The assailant, not seen. It's not uncommon for violent deaths down there. They are an uncouth bunch. But the next day there is another one, and the assailant is spotted and chased. The assailant, which sparks a memory. Someone describes the assailant as a man with one arm. He's chased out towards the back, up onto the cliffs. And to avoid being apprehended for what potentially is murder, throws himself off the cliff. There is no chance he would have survived that. But with this one-armed man gone, a search was made of the warehouses. And in a barrel, Charles was found, beaten to death, been dead a few days. Julian was a little bit perplexed too, for he also heard of this one-armed man. He'd also heard that all these body parts they had retrieved from the house, they had buried at one of the nearby cemeteries in an unmarked grave. And on further investigation, they found the grave had been disturbed and the body parts mostly had been removed. That was a very chilling concept. Well, with Charles gone and dead, Julian suggested I make a clean start. And I agreed. I made contact with a cousin in a nearby town, and he suggested we go to France for a while. He had contacts there, and I could start a new life and be free of this stigma of potential dishonour and embarrassment. And so Margaret finds herself on this boat with Mary, heading to Calais. Mary's final few words on this sheet are most interesting. She says, "It is several hours and the ship finally approaches Calais. Everyone is shaken badly from the night's events. And as the ship comes into the dock, Percy opens the door and puts his head round the door to tell me to prepare to disembark within the next 20 minutes. He is then gone back onto deck to help. Next, appearing at the door, is Margaret's chaperone. Straight away, his uncouth and dark demeanour as he peers around the door and looks at Margaret. This is one vile man. He barks roughly at Margaret to tell her a similar Similar thing. He begins to shout back up onto the deck and closes the door. And then I notice Margaret's expression. Her face is horrified. She looks directly at me. That voice, that muffled voice, is similar to the one the night Charles went missing. The man that came into the house. That was my cousin. She looks in complete astonishment and horror at the implications. The ship docks. She stumbles numbly to the deck. I am concerned about Margaret and what future she may have. There we go. That's that one. Oh, I messed that one up a little bit. Right, okay. Where are we? 32. Right, I'm going to do, instead, normally I would do Earthlings Are Tasty because I do like the alien invasion story. But we're going to do Knight Rider. I haven't done this one for a long time. Not since, Virtual Fringe last year. Let's see if I can remember a year ago. Seeing last night's show, I couldn't remember 2 or 3 months ago. This is hopeful. But hey, I'd rather make a fool of myself into the ether and not in person. Right. Now, in my travels, I'm an investigative journalist. And I investigate unusual things that happen around my locality. Anything that sort of I almost said it again, I've done that before, perks my interest in the unusual. And one winter night, while perusing the local newspaper, something did. There was a report of some horse riders running down cars. Now, that's a dangerous thing to do, to be honest. The roads around here between the small villages are quite lethal. And the one, my hometown, just about 8 miles north along here from Dover, is Deal. It's an obscure little town. And the road between Deal and Dover is very narrow and very ancient. Lots of various pubs and coaching houses lurk upon that road. It's been a main thoroughfare for centuries between the two towns. Now, normally the horses stick to the fields nearby, but around one of the pubs, the 5 Bells, no, it's 8 Bells, at Ringwold, some horses were spotted harassing cars, getting close to them, which late at night is very dangerous. Okay, it's a 50-mile-an-hour zone, but horses aren't well lit. Now, I just put it down to some irresponsible horse riders. Generally, they're all okay. They know they are well behaved. It's usually the motorists that are the problem. But in this case, there were a few ranting about it, and the journalist had probably looked like he'd interviewed a few other locals who were claiming horse riders are a menace, and then some motorists a menace too. So, you know, it was just an out of place article. Week later, same again. So I thought, okay, nothing's being done about this. Why don't I have a look? But there was one aspect to the story that was a little bit more than just horse riders. There was another article mentioning a horse rider on the other side of the town. And they had intercepted a motorcyclist doing a food delivery and blocked the road. Now, you know, a motorcyclist can't reverse easily, but the horse rider was armed and essentially robbed the guy on the motorbike. Now that is crazy. I wondered whether these things were all connected. So, gathering my usual gang of accomplices, I set watch. I tasked them. I gave them all a little bit of pub beer money and sent them off to various outlying pubs just to watch for any news or any overheard conversations about these. Well, it ended up costing me a fortune, to be honest. Days went by and not a sign. Then I get a hurried phone call from this pub in Ringwold. One of my friends, one of my contacts there, Nigel, he whispered hurriedly a horse had been spotted running alongside cars on the main road. Okay. So I quickly grab the car and head over. I stop a bit of away from the pub just in case the horse is around. I don't want to spook or even get intercepted myself. I abandon the car and go across the field on foot in the dark, which is a stupid thing to do because I could easily break my neck, twist my ankle or whatever in those fields. It's dark. It's getting on for pub closing time. And I notice dark shadows moving up and down the road. I catch the headlights of an oncoming car. Perhaps I'm going to catch these in the act of doing whatever it is they're doing. I ready cameras, just in case. And try and find a place in which to conceal myself. There were some good bushes, very handy. I see the oncoming car. It begins to slow down. And I can see the outline of two horse riders in front of the car, caught in the headlights. The car seems to have stopped. I creep closer. One of the horsemen raises their arm and points at the car. At that point, I hear a crack. That's an unusual sound. Now, I've got experience of firearms, and it definitely wasn't a normal bullet. But something happened, and the car slams its into acceleration and head straight for the horses. Something is really wrong here. The horses part and lurch out the way. The car doesn't go very far and ends up running up the bank. I run towards it. I don't know if someone's injured. I get closer and see the windscreen has been severely cracked. With no one else on the road, I make it to the car and find the driver okay, just badly shaken, absolutely white with fear, and they point at the hole in the windscreen. Something was fired. Obviously, firearms. Police was called. I've got good connections with the police there, and I asked a few relevant questions in the following days. What I got from the report was that the driver encountered these two horse riders. They were peculiarly dressed. They had hats on. They could see. It was very old. They were in like costume or something. And they had scarves on so that she couldn't make out the face. And they did fire some pistol of some kind, and the ballistics from the police report show there was a ball bearing. So it wasn't a bullet, it was some kind of musket or something, which is a little odd. The driver didn't know what it was they demanded, but they were scared and they were beaten off. I set my team up again the following night, just in case if I can catch them. And I lurk in the same spot, because that seemed to be the most frequent place they occurred. Well, as the moon came up and it was getting close to the witching hour, with still no sign of these riders, I hear muffled hooves. I turned to look across the fields from behind my bush that I had grown accustomed to hiding in, and I saw two riders approaching rapidly. I ready my camera, zoom in, and then I freeze. Something unusual about these riders. Sure, they were dressed in some kind of costume, as in, old highwaymen of like the 1800s. It was really bizarre. They carried pistols, swords, but it was their face, or the little bit of their face that I could catch in the handkerchiefs and masks that they had over their face. I could see their eyes. Or I thought I could see their eyes. They weren't eyes. They were just bright lights. Must have been reflection off of something. I couldn't tell. And the skin was very pale. But, it was midnight. The moon was out. Could have just been just the trick of the eyes. Well, I stay huddled in the bush, and I begin to be a little bit fearful, for they are heading directly for me. Had they seen me? I try to make as little profile as possible and as still as possible. They were heading straight for me. I could hear the horses breathing, heavy, panting, as they lurched and galloped. They leapt over the bush. I could feel the air, and their hooves just almost touched me. But from my vantage point, I look up and see their faces. They were ghastly white. They were almost skeletal. Well, they didn't head towards the pub. They didn't head towards the main road. They headed straight across the road and across the fields to the point where the motorbike incident was a few days previously. I must have chose the wrong place. Well, following morning, I gather my team to work out where to go from here. I don't mention what I witnessed last night. It's too wild. Things have been going in my head all night, thinking, are these actors? Are these not? Are these something else? I mentioned to Nigel about this, and he suggests we talk about it. Well, obviously my team think I'm completely bonkers, but perhaps we could do something about it. We don't know whether they're real or not. The police are getting nowhere. Perhaps we could do something. And someone... oh, this was crazy. Someone suggested, why don't we do reenactment 2? Obviously they are in costume causing chaos just to hide their appearance, which I let it go. Why don't we raid the local museum or costume shops and be revenue men and fight back? Perhaps it will scare them off to know they've been rumbled. Well, why not? That or we involve the police, and the police could be heavy-handed and scare them off. So we gather some horses from one of our contacts who has a stable. We dress up in various costumes, probably not authentic, but hopefully under the cover of darkness we won't get rumbled for the idiots that we are. We take our horses and wait. I then begin to realise that most of my accomplices haven't actually ever rode a horse before. I have, and I begin to wonder whether this is going to go horribly wrong. But too late now. The night is cold, and we wait. The moon comes out. Rather not be too much of a moon. We don't want to be too obvious about our fake. Luckily, cloud partially obscures the moon, and we spot the two riders at the bottom of the field again. They're heading towards us. We let them come up a little way, and we begin to nudge our horses into a trot. I don't bother looking behind me. I know they're either with me or they have gone completely in different directions. But I'm hoping there's enough of us that we can muster some kind of authentic looking opposition. Our trot increases. We get into a gallop. We draw swords and guns and pistols in the hope that we never actually have to use them because they are not real. We whoop and we shout. Thankfully, we catch the attention of these two riders. They veer towards us. I wasn't expecting kind of a confrontation. But we were committed now, and we rode head on. As the two groups headed one another to almost contact, the two riders suddenly stopped, turned, and ran. Now, while it was overcast, it was still quite clear. But we all agree that those horses just faded into nothing. Were they there at all? We may never know. But the Deal Dover Road was plagued by numerous highwaymen over the years. And perhaps they had come back for one last raid. Thank you. Yeah, that didn't go right. Must rehearse. And not change plans at the last second. Right, okay, I'm going to just do the last one. We got 10 minutes. This one I did recently, well, 3 or 4 months ago. Anyway, this will do. When I was growing up, we didn't really have posh holidays. We couldn't afford it. What we would do was go down the coast to Hastings, stay in a caravan, and that would be the summer holiday. Well, one year when we were, I think May was being about not quite teens, about 11, 12, my parents decided to just change things a little bit. They found through some of the newspaper ads a farmhouse that was even cheaper than the caravans. So we gave it a try. It was on an old farm, working farm. It had stopped being a working farm for quite some time. And it was cheap and it was enjoyable. My parents loved it. It was in the middle of nowhere. There were pubs nearby. That was good entertainment for them. And of course, on an old farm, that was massive entertainment for my sister and I. Okay, health and safety would have gone berserk nowadays. There was lots of farm implements and machinery that were just lying idle. Plenty of things that, could cause fatality. But hey, this was the 70s, early 80s. Who cared about that kind of thing? Well, our first year there was fine. But we thought there was something a bit odd about the farm. We couldn't put our finger on it. Second time back, because we enjoyed it and it was still cheap, we noticed what the thing was. There was a ghost. It wasn't a bad ghost. And my sister and I really latched onto it because we'd go to bed and we'd wake up and there'd be a glass of milk on our bedside tables. Now, our parents said they didn't put that in there, but then they could have been messing with us. So we put it as the ghost was just being, friendly and helpful. And, it was very friendly. We'd often play board games in the evening. And there was this old rocking chair that was against one of the walls when we always went there. And as we were playing the board games, occasionally it would lurch across the room, get about halfway by the end of it would take quite some time to get over, but only ever get about halfway across the room. And we thought, the ghost wants to sit and join in the fun. And, it became a thing over the next 2 or 3 years. But times change and we stopped going. I'd completely forgotten about this place for a long time, many years, and work happened to take me down that area. I thought, oh, perhaps I'll just drop in and see how, if things had changed, places change, if it was the same. I couldn't find the farmhouse. It was a whole new estate of some kind. But I did find one of the pubs we went into. And I dropped in, just to have a quick coffee and see what was around there. And, that was like 30 years ago. 30, even 40 years ago. A long time ago. And I could swear it was the same landlady and landlord running the pub. So I get chatting with them and say, I used to stay there at the farm. And funny thing is, the landlady just clammed up and went very quiet, excused herself and said she'll be back shortly. I didn't think much of it until about 10, 20 minutes later, before I was just about to leave, she turned up with a picture frame and a newspaper cutting. She says, I should read this. I look, oh, it's about the farm. And then my blood runs cold. It's about a murder at the farm. I feel the hairs on the back of my neck tingle. There's a picture of the rocking chair in the middle of the room. And a photo. I recognise that rocking chair. I recognise the room. I think I need to read this. My blood runs cold. Apparently, the woman who owned the farm had 2 children. And one night, she poisoned their milk. She then moved the rocking chair to the middle of the room, stood on it, and hung herself from the ceiling. I remember those drinks that were left every night we stayed. And I remember the rocking chair moving to exactly the same spot that the photo shows, the place where she died. How close were we from a similar fate? Sleep well, and thank you for coming along to this complete chaotic show. Tomorrow's last show, my Egyptian one, which is actually well rehearsed because I did it every day last week. So that one will be together. And thank you and good night.